Good evening, and welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Education for May 1st, 2023. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta?
Here.
Mrs. Bradford?
Here.
Mrs. Burton?
Here.
Mrs. Frank?
Here.
Mrs. Jarvis is absent. Mrs. Bonnefield is here. President Johnson?
Here, we do have a quorum, thank you. That takes us to item 2, our Pledge of Allegiance, and Mrs. Acosta, would you lead us this evening?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening and welcome again to all those in attendance and those who may be watching from home. Anybody who wants to follow along with our agenda tonight, you can find the agendas on the door to the left. And if you turn to the right, you'll see not only the agendas, but blue slips for anybody who wants to address the board during audience communication. For those at home who want to follow along with our agenda, you can go to our website, which is livoniapublicschools.org. You can highlight over the board tab, and you'll see a drop down for board meeting information, and you can follow along there with our agenda for this evening. One of the things that we hold very, very high is our community with character, and one of those attributes is respect. And you will see that amongst the board members. We don't always agree on things that come before the board, but we always respect each other and each other's opinions. We think that's the best way that we can show our community, and especially our young children, how to act and be good citizens. So we pledge that we will respect anyone who comes before the board, particularly this evening, and all we ask in return is that they respect us as well. The other thing that you might notice is that there isn't a lot of discussion on the items that come before the board in our voting meeting, which we call a regular meeting. That's because the items that come before the board have generally been discussed at least twice, possibly 3 times, before they ever get to the board for a vote. So if you really want to watch the nitty-gritty and the questions that are asked, I would ask you to go to our Committee of the Whole meetings. You can see them on our website. They're all there to be viewed, and you can see the discussion that we had at that meeting before it ever gets to here. To this board table. So that's why you might not hear a lot of questions or discussions about items coming before the board. With that, we'll go into our next item, which is our item 3, communications, and 3A is Sympathy Resolution, Joshua Redding. May I have a motion, please?
President Burton.
Mrs. Acosta.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached sympathy resolution for the family of Joshua Redding, who is an 8th grade student at Holmes Middle School. Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank. And Mr. Etu.
Thank you, President Johnson, Board of Education members, Superintendent Oquist. I certainly stand here this evening with a heavy heart in the untimely passing of our student and friend Josh. I do want to take a moment and express my sincerest condolences to the family. There really are no words to describe the sadness Josh's family, friends, and community felt and will continue to feel. Although I did not have the privilege of knowing Josh personally, the stories about Josh that were shared with me certainly warmed my heart, knowing so many cared for and were drawn to Josh and his larger-than-life smile. There's such a comfort in knowing the Holmes community and staff have wrapped their arms around the Redding and Flowers families, especially Josh's younger siblings, including his brother, who's a 7th grade student at Holmes. And with that, the sympathy resolution for Joshua Redding reads as follows. Whereas the Board of Education was deeply saddened to hear of the untimely death of a special member of our school community, Joshua Redding, on March 26, 2023. And whereas Joshua Redding, cherished son of Brianna and Michael Flowers was an 8th grader at Holmes Middle School, where he enjoyed learning, track and field, and spending time with his friends, and was admired by staff and students. And whereas Joshua will be remembered with great fondness by his family, friends, and many others who knew him. And whereas Joshua epitomized true strength, determination, and an indomitable spirit throughout his short life. And whereas Joshua enjoyed playing video games, going to the movies, and FaceTiming with family and friends. He was known to have a passion for clothes, shoes, and foreign cars, as well as a smile that could light up any room. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District offers its heartfelt sympathy to the family and friends of Joshua Redding for the great loss of their beloved son, brother, and friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Etu. Before we vote on this matter, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for Josh Redding. Thank you all. Is there any input from the board? Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. I'll just briefly add to Mr. Etu's sentiments that I can't imagine a more tragic thing, a more horrific thing for a parent and a family to have to go through than the loss of their child. And both as a mom and as an educator, I feel so deeply, deeply saddened for Josh's family, for his many friends, for the people who were beside him each and every day. And so we send our love, and we continue to keep you in our prayers.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, second by Mrs. Frank, to adopt a sympathy resolution for Joshua Redding. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you all. That takes us now to item 3B, Points of Pride, School Library Month recognition. And we have Mrs. Jenkins. Good evening.
Good evening, President Burton. I knew I was going to do that. President Johnson. You've been so good up until now.
Old habits are hard to break.
Exactly. Also, good evening to the board and to Superintendent Oquist. The state of Michigan has designated April as School Library Month. And although we are officially into the month of May as of today, we couldn't pass up the opportunity to highlight our amazing library media centers, as well as our media specialists who run these spaces at all 23 of our schools. As you know, our LMCs are central to our school learning environments. They are the hub of the school for collaboration, research, and much more. I still remember visiting Cooper Elementary, used to be just Cooper Elementary back in the day, the library there when I was young. It was a magical place for me as a child. Our school librarian, Mrs. Goodwin, would encourage creativity, and she would even publish the books that we had written. I still have those little storybooks that I wrote and illustrated, bound by cardboard and contact paper, and closed with those little gold clip tacks. For me, the library fostered my love for creative writing, researching, and reading books just for fun. We are so proud that LPS has maintained these spaces for our students throughout the decades. And joining us here tonight, we have Mr. Paul Casada. If you'd like to join me, Paul. He will offer a few words about the amazing things that continue to happen in our school libraries.
Thank you. So, yes, as we said, this was declared the School Library Month. And so we're really excited to take this opportunity to recognize what we do as a district and really hold up our program as a point of pride, because we are one of the few districts that still maintains a true program. with a certified teacher in every school working in our media centers. And that truly is something that we should be proud of and be proud that we hold that distinction. But to say that the district just maintains this program is truly an understatement. As you're aware, thanks to the support of our community, each of our media center spaces in our schools has been or will be renovated. And if you have had a chance to visit any of the 5 schools renovated this past summer, I'm confident that you let out an involuntary wow as you crossed the threshold, as I did. Each renovation marks another example of the district's support of our school library program and making our media centers the learning hub of each school. Of course, we cannot speak about our remarkable school library program without acknowledging the backbone of our programs, which is our media specialists. I am now completing my 2nd year in this newly created role as a district's media and technology coordinator. In this time, I've had the opportunity to watch our district media specialists work collaboratively to update and redesign their current curriculums to create a K-12 guaranteed and viable curriculum that aligns with and supports the student learning going on in classrooms. Our media specialists are experts in creating engaging and innovative experience for our students. At Johnson, Ms. Acker transformed her media center into an escape room where students work in collaborative groups to solve puzzles while also learning about how to navigate their media center and find information for a school project, but also find that next book they will fall in love with. At Holmes, Ms. Sutherland works alongside teachers who support our ELL students in order to expand the library's collection of books written in different languages, as well as high-low books to engage struggling readers. Ms. Hillary at Rosedale teaches her students about primary resources by asking Mrs. Kohler, the principal, to bring in artifacts and primary resources from her childhood. The students then use these resources to try and figure out who they are learning about. Just an important side note to that project, it's not just about what they're learning, but now they're also establishing a relationship with their principal. And building those relationships is so important for administration. Ms. Comise at Cleveland and Ms. Ford at Buchanan use various online resources such as Michigan's eLibrary or MEL, Pebble Go, Britannica School, and World Book Kids to teach students about how to find safe and reliable information and how to cite sources. Ms. McGuire at Emerson loves to do book talks with students to introduce them to new literature. She finds that book talks are extremely successful in helping students who do not see themselves as readers find that just right book for them. Mr. Rapson at Churchill has been a vital team member in creating the Charger Connection program, which acclimates freshmen to their new school through large group meetings with upper class mentors. These meetings are held in the Media Center, and Mr. Rapson thrives on forging connections with students and developing a love for libraries. Ms. Czar at Randolph works with her 1st grade students to develop a love of reading and technology by studying award-winning picture books and then having the students recreate pictures from the books using Google Slides. She sent me a few examples, they're very cute. Mr. Pint at Roosevelt uses Minecraft to support and reinforce various learning modules. For example, his 4th grade students build ramps with rails and a minecart while the students are learning about potential and kinetic energy in their classroom. 2nd grade students use Minecraft to build a house for the 3rd little pig using the different materials available in the Minecraft world. At Riley, Ms. O'Harris is currently teaching 6th grade students about copyright and what images, videos, and sounds can be used in presentations and projects for free, and what to do when you have media that is copyrighted. They are demonstrating their learning by creating book trailers using an online video editing program called Animoto. At Kennedy, Ms. Bashwadi pairs her teaching with the K4 ELA modules to, as she put it, allows what we learn and do in the library to move outside the library walls. Some examples include creating apps that explain how to survive a natural disaster, or coding robots to tour locations in Michigan. She's also known to help coordinate a pretty wild glow party for the students when they reach their school's March's Reading Month goals. I could go on and on. But in addition to teaching, our media specialists are also working alongside district leadership in the process of designing our new modern media center spaces, while they also serve their buildings in a number of different capacities, giving a whole new meaning to other duties as assigned. In addition to all that, they've also circulated over 200,000 books in our libraries this year. I know a few of our media specialists have joined us tonight, and so I would like to ask them to stand at this time to be recognized for their efforts. Thank you again for allowing me this opportunity to lift up our school program as a true point of pride for Livonia Public Schools, and thank you for all your support you have given to keep this important program available to our students and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casada. Do you have any questions or comments? Mrs. Burton.
As a parent, early on in the district, the library was the very first place where I was welcomed in as a parent to volunteer, and quickly had a love for that. Mr. Shinovar, who's here with us this evening, was one of the media specialists who allowed me to come into that space once a week, and not only that, but to bring my littlest one at home, who was not yet in elementary school. She became so comfortable there that she knew the library was her space where she got to come to school every day, even before she was a kindergartner. But it's exciting to be a parent. It's a fabulous place to volunteer in our schools. I'm certain that those parent volunteer hands are still welcome. If you are a parent, a grandparent, another caregiver who's looking for an opportunity to give back to the school district and to be part of your child's life while you're also being a fly on the wall, it's a fabulous place. You get to watch your child interact while you're kind of across the room doing something else that's legitimately helpful and needed in the building. But it's wonderful. And again, coming from the perspective of a parent, I would like to thank all of our media specialists for allowing us to come in to that space and help out and really be a part of our child's education in a meaningful way. Thank you for what you do for our kids. To instill such a love of reading, especially the elementary age. There's just such a spark. Our littlest learners are so excited about everything still, and the media specialists and the LMC experience is just a really exciting way that our kids can become so engaged, and it's a blast to be a parent and watch that take off. But we have, as Mr. Casada said, we have our media specialists to thank for that, because a room full of materials is just a room full of materials until somebody makes it all come alive. So thank you very much to the media specialists that I've had the privilege of volunteering with, Mr. Shinovar being one of several. But thank you to all of you for all of the opportunities that you give us as parents, as well as our kiddos, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mrs. Bradford.
Thank you, President Burton. Good Lord.
I'll just leave.
I echo the sentiment of Mrs. Burton, President Johnson. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much to our media specialists who work tirelessly, and I love just the creativity of all the different activities and all the different things that you do with our students. And I, too, have spent a lot of times in the past with my children in the library. And the importance of having a library and a working library and getting books into the hands of our children is one of the most important things that we can do for our students, and nurturing a love of reading. And I know there's so much technology out there, but just the value of holding a book in your hands and getting the job that you have is to, develop a love to nurture these kids with these books is really the most important thing that we can do. And I'm so happy that we are able to have media specialists in our library that know and have the knowledge of what they're doing. It's great to have parent volunteers, but we need media specialists. We need you, and it's such an important role. And I will always support that. And I'm so glad to see that we have reimagined our media centers, because it has changed. And there's so many different avenues and activities that we now do with our students. And I just applaud you for all your efforts, and thank you very much. And it's definitely a point of pride for our district, so thank you for all you do.
Thank you, President Mrs. Bradford.
Oh, goodness.
Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad that you shared with us, Mr. Casada, and I'm so glad to have so many of our media specialists here with us this evening that we could recognize. I will say, as a principal, I always thought of of the media specialists that I had an opportunity to work with as really a thought partner and an idea partner. They were always the people that were involved in school-wide activities and school-wide events. They're one of the people that knew all of our children and so many of our families, because you have them year after year after year. And so the relationships that you are able to form with our kids and with our families goes often beyond that of a teacher that may only have a child for 1 year. And so I just always thought that was such a great opportunity to, again, just serve as a thought partner and be a brainstormer. And I have to say, it was often the media specialists with whom I worked that would say, we can do that, we'll figure out a way. And I think beyond that, the opportunity to extend, and I think you gave this example of really extending the curriculum beyond both the walls of the classroom and the walls of the library, because when we see that work best is when we see really our libraries as an extension of what is available to our children. And to have those resources, I will echo Mrs. Jenkins, it was one of my very favorite places as an elementary student. And I would often find any reason I could to go down there on days when it wasn't our library day. And I also just want to say a quick shout out and a thank you. I don't know who exactly was involved, but I know many of our media specialists, and you were involved, Mr. Casada, recently in updating our policies with regard to our board policies. And so I believe we're back on for a first reading tonight. But I know that's been in the works for several months. And really being able to share really rich information about our processes of book selection and how that process goes, and our media specialists play the most vital role in that. So thank you for your time in helping us work on that policy as well. So a great opportunity and certainly a point of pride.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Other comments? Mrs. Acosta.
I was just going to say really quickly, thank you so much for making those spaces welcoming and safe spaces for students. I know that if you've had my kids, I'm looking at Mrs. O'Hara's, that there have been times where you've had to kick them out of the media center. So I appreciate that those spaces have been just such a joy for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. Any others? I just want to say, Mr. Casada, when you mentioned going into the new LMCs, and it's like, wow. And we've had the opportunity to do that, and you're absolutely right. We walked in and it was wow. It's just amazing what's happened, and I appreciate you sort of describing what the media specialists and the principals are doing. That's always enjoyable for us to hear that, so thank you for bringing that to our attention. We love to hear that, and thank you all for being here tonight. Okay, that will take us now to item, we need to vote on it.
Let's see.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Do we have?
No, we don't have,
no, sorry.
no,
My bad.
I had the wrong note. You're a bad influence on me.
Tonight. Better behave
Yeah,
myself.
you better behave. That will take us to item 3C, which is recognition of board members receiving MASB awards. And Mrs. Jenkins.
Thank you, President Johnson. It's my pleasure to once again recognize the achievements of our Board of Education through its continuous dedication to learning and growing through the Michigan Association of School Boards. For several consecutive years, our Board of Education earned the distinction of being an honor board, which indicated at that time that every board member is certified through the MASB. For the past 3 years, however, our Board of Education has stepped it up a notch and is now by being named a Standard of Excellence Board. This means that all board members have not only become MASB certified, but they have also each achieved a minimum designation of Award of Merit. Each level of certification requires hours and hours of coursework in a comprehensive professional development program. For all 7 board members to receive the Award of Merit is a feat that is not all too common throughout our state. For your dedication to continuous improvement, we applaud you. We have a special certificate to mark the occasion. You can add this to your vast collection of certificates. And the certificate reads Livonia Public Schools, Certificate of Recognition. Livonia Public Schools Board of Education, this one is for President Mark Johnson, for your dedication and for your commitment and dedication in achieving with your board colleagues the MASB Standard of Excellence Whole Board status for the 3rd consecutive year. Dated May 1st, 2023, signed by Superintendent Oquist. And if I may present these, and then I'll be right back at the microphone to elaborate on a few MASB awards.
Thank you. Very nice. Very, very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so in addition, we have 3 board members who have advanced their individual levels through the MASB coursework. Our board members continue to advance their education by moving through the levels of certification, and this year we are proud to recognize 3 who have achieved those advancements. First, we would like to recognize Trustee Madeline Acosta for achieving an MASB Award of Distinction. The Award of Distinction represents the successful completion of Level 1 and Level 2 coursework. Mrs. Acosta continues to impress us with her dedication to quickly excelling through the various levels of certification. Congratulations, and this achievement is also reflected on your certificate. If we could give Mrs. Acosta a round of applause. Next, we'd like to recognize Board Vice President Karen Bradford for earning Master Board Member Award. This means that Karen has successfully completed levels 1, 2, and 3 in the MASB coursework. Congratulations to Mrs. Bradford, and this is also reflected on your certificate. Thank you. And unfortunately, Trustee Liz Jarvis is not with us this evening, but we would also like to congratulate Liz on achieving the Data Skills Specialty Award. Now, I had not heard of this one before. This means that Mrs. Jarvis completed the requirements for Level 1, as well as additional coursework, including data strategic planning and goal setting. These are a couple of different course names, just to give you an idea. Data foundations, and additional courses that focus on, you guessed it, data. She does love that data. So congratulations, Mrs. Jarvis, and her certificate also reflects her award. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Oquist.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Jenkins. So we certainly don't ever want to take for granted the fact that we have a Board of Education who is not only so committed to our children, to our staff, and to our schools, but they are also committed to their own continued professional growth. To have a board who now for several years in a row has been named an honor board in the state of Michigan, one of only very few, and then to have moved on to the next level in the standard of excellence. And while we have 3 new board members who have been awarded either awards of merit or distinction, each year we have additional board members who have earned that status. And most recently they were recognized at a special awards event in Wayne County. But I really want to say beyond that, I'd like to just speak for a moment to the individuals and the human beings that they are, because they exemplify leadership and integrity and collaboration. Every single one of them are here to serve others and to do so unselfishly. Not one of them come in with the mindset of any individual agenda. They are truly here to be deep thinkers, to care about our community, and to really focus in on whatever it is we're bringing to them. If you listen to any one of our study sessions or our committee of the whole meetings, you will hear thoughtful questions not only about fiscal responsibility, but student achievement and academic performance, the climate and culture within our schools, and their ability to, while not working in this day to day, they all have other jobs and other many busy parts of their lives. They are able to delve deeply into each of these topics in a way that shows their care and their commitment to our school district. I will tell you they are unique. A board like this does not exist in very many places. I believe we all know how fortunate we are. Our cabinet team talks about it often, and we are truly grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Otis. I'd just like to say that while it's nice to get an award like this, that's not what we do it for. We do it for the students, for our teachers, our staff. We continually do it. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Frank and I are taking classes again in 2 weeks. So it's an ongoing process. It never stops. And as I said, we don't do it for the recognition. We do it for the learning. We don't, although we've been on the board, Mrs. Burton and I have been on here almost 13 years, and most of us multiple years. You don't know it all. We are just sponges to the knowledge that other people have. And we want to get there someday. It's not today. We don't know when that will be, and that's why we continually take these classes, go to conferences, and I think it reflects in the work that we do. And although we as a board, we get the recognition, our cabinet does just an outstanding job. They make our job look easy. So we thank you for helping us. We appreciate it very, very much. Okay. We'll move on to item 3D, our district update from the superintendent. I'll turn it back over to Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, President Johnson. As always, I appreciate the opportunity to share some highlights from across the district, so we will put those up on the screen and share some highlights with you. As you know, we are always learning and growing, and so we have some of our students here from the Livonia Career Technical Center, the criminal justice class. We were really pleased to have the Farmington Hills Police Department come out and really share some tools that they use, and also be able to talk about opportunities that our students can have to learn more about the field of criminal justice, either now or upon graduation. Next, you'll see some really amazing fourth graders at Hayes Elementary. Yes, they are writing 5-paragraph essays. If anyone tells you that a lower elementary student cannot, let us show you how. That takes a lot of work, and I will say that our teachers build year after year after year and grow their reading stamina, grow their writing stamina, and their ability to effectively communicate. This really is a point of pride and something that we look for as an exit for each of our fourth graders across the district. So we love to celebrate the learning that they're doing. You'll see next, we have some of Mrs. Mitchell's kindergartners. They were using balance scales, and they were practicing their teamwork. She's always got some amazing things going on across her classroom, a busy and a happy place. Next, you'll see some of our fourth graders who took a visit to the Capitol. So this happens from many schools across the district. And we were very grateful that Representative Kolazar was able to be there. So sometimes our reps are there and they're in session. Other times they're not, but it's always feel like it's a lucky day when one of our representatives are there and they can take our students onto the floor and be able to talk a little bit about the work that they do. And so we know that our students were excited to be there, and we were happy to have Rep. Colazar there with them. We recently had Earth Day, and so I always love to see the ways our schools celebrate Earth Day and think about taking care of our planet. I think I always, when I see the commitment of our children, whether it's in our green schools or their efforts for recycling or the work that they do in Earth Day, it always makes me so hopeful for the future and the work that they want to do to help take care of our planet, or as many of our schools say, to take care of this place. Of course, it's always good to take a break. This was a moment of time where there was a yellow orb in the sky, the sun that we haven't seen for quite a while. But we always love to see our kiddos out there, and we're hoping that that sunshine comes back. But enjoying some of our new playground equipment, and that's always great to see. We are full-fledged into spring sports. Again, we've been interrupted on many times by the weather, but our kiddos have really stuck through. So we've seen our teams really going nonstop during the spring season and doing lots of double headers, and both in softball and in baseball. Franklin held a great event on Friday night, the Friday Night Lights, and they made it through temps in the 40s and rain here and there. But our track and field athletes did an awesome job. So kudos to them and to their coaches and the work that they do this time of year. We also have our students from each of our 3 upper elementary schools enjoying 6th grade camp. Always a really special time. So you see the team members from Riley here and a lot of our kiddos who headed to camp last week. And so this is really that time of year when each of our upper elementaries go to camp, and always a time to remember. I still remember that from back in the day, and that was a while ago. We were really happy to see some of our students from Niji Iro were able to perform at the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C., and you see their beautiful smiling faces here, and we're happy to celebrate them and that they could be part of that special festivity. Last week, we had Arbor Day celebration. As you know, the city has been celebrating Arbor Day for about 25 years in Livonia, and they have been, Livonia for many years has been named Tree City, USA, and each year they ask an elementary school to host the Arbor Day celebration, and Coolidge did an amazing job last year, and Cleveland did a wonderful job this year. We had to move the event inside, which we normally are outside for this event, and they actually then move right on to planting the tree. But there were some hardy 4th graders that were there ready with their raincoats and their shovels, so they did go outside. But we also heard some wonderful songs from our K-1 students, some pretty funny jokes about trees from our 2nd grade students, and our third grade students read some poems about nature and about trees. So we were pleased to have Mayor Brosnan there and pleased to have members of the Livonia Tree Commission. You see Mr. Green and Mr. Witherspoon there as well. So it was a great celebration, even though we held that indoors. So thank you to Cleveland for being host this year. And we wanted to share some thanks from across the district. So as you know, how much we value our amazing administrative professionals throughout the district. The one sitting in my right, to my right, while we don't have favorites, there really is no finer. And I know how grateful I am to be able to partner with Mrs. Wozniak each day, and I know all of our departments in schools feel that same way. So we had a chance here to celebrate, and I know many of the schools did the very same. So we just want to acknowledge all that they do to keep our schools, our programs, not only running, but really thriving and being welcoming places for our students and our families. And here is our awesome PTSA Council. You'll see that they were wearing their Livonia Pride shirts when they represented at the state PTSA convention. So we have such a great group. I have the privilege of meeting with them each month, and the LPTSA Council represents folks from across our district that have been involved in PTSA. usually for years, and the work that they continue to do and the models that they are for the other individual PTAs in our district really cannot be overstated. So thanks to those wonderful ladies. And we had an opportunity to have the Churchill High School Interact Club, who sponsors the Touch a Truck event, and we know that Mrs. Bonifield she is cheering on as we see here. So this event, in partnership with the Livonia Rotary AM Club, of which Mrs. Bonifield is president, Interact recently presented an over $9,000 donation to the Livonia Fire Department, VT Seva, Shelter Box International, and Rotary International Earthquake Fund for Syria and Turkey. So we are so proud of the work that the Churchill High School Interact Club does, and you see some of those proud members here. And we would like to congratulate some of our student athletes. So we are part of the KLAA, that is our athletic and activities membership division association. Thank you. The Kensington Lakes Athletic Association. So they had a leadership summit recently, and we had students from each of our high schools there to be represented. It's a great opportunity for them not only to serve in that leadership role and to learn themselves, but they have an opportunity to meet with other student leaders from other schools within the KLAA. And so we recently had that opportunity, and always a great growth for them and a wonderful way for them to represent LPS. We recently shared with our staff some information about the DIA, who is a great partner for our schools. They will provide not only field trips, but busing for classes from any of the Tri-County schools. But in addition to that, they are going to be hosting a special Wayne County High School arts exhibition. So they take really the top pieces and works of art from across Wayne County. And we have 7 students that were selected to be represented. So that is going to take place from the end of June till the end of July. There's a special exhibit at the DIA. It's free for anyone to go to the DIA if you live within those 3 counties. So I just want to share a few of the pieces that we see here. I mean, these literally look like professional paintings, beautifully done. We'll share a couple more. So I'm sorry, these are the only ones from the DIA, but then we also have our amazing artists represented right now at the library for the Fine Arts Festival. They may just be starting to take down because they have been there throughout the month of April. As you know, every year we love that the library partners with us. Our art teachers work their magic, and then after they've worked their magic, they have to somehow narrow that down to just a few dozen pieces from each school. But we had the opportunity to see beautiful pieces of ceramic, paintings, drawings, etchings, jewelry. We love that the library allows us to display that on both levels of the library and for the entire community to see. So congratulations to both our staff and our students who put that together. We recently had The Wizard of Oz. I know many folks in this room had a chance to see the Stevenson's Drama Department's recent wonderful production, and they were certainly wowed by this fan favorite. So beautiful set design, great great characters that just came to life. And again, we love to see those in our performing arts centers and to see our students and their talents come to life, not only on stage, but I also always want to acknowledge all of the students it takes to be behind the scenes, literally behind the scenes, helping to bring these wonderful creative productions alive. Next, you'll see Kappa perform Lost Girl. They had sold out shows. This was held in the Black Box, so I know some of you have been to the Black Box. That's the smaller theater that they have within Churchill, but certainly still a big performance that came from Kappa, and congratulations to them. And then we also had a great performance last week. Captain Louis was performed by the students in our center and ASD programs. They did an absolutely amazing job, and we were just, they had a rapt audience, and we had students from Johnson, from Frost, as well as many proud parents and grandparents. And I just want to give a special shout out to Ann Fisher and Sue Tatro, who were the two teachers primarily responsible for bringing this together. And also give a shout out to our Peer Connections mentors who were there also to support our students in this wonderful production. So the robotics team has been busy. As you know, they recently went to the World Championship. They traveled to Houston once again for the competition, and they placed 46th. And while they weren't selected for playoffs, they did receive the Industrial Design Award for the Johnson Field by GM. So we really do have a tremendous robot, and so I'm thrilled that they were recognized for that. And you'll see another special recognition on the next slide, that our very own Mrs. Carlini, who has really been our stalwart, our coach, and the mentor in our Livonia Warriors, and helping all of our robotics teams throughout the district. She was named a Woody Flowers Award finalist, and she was honored with this award. It celebrates effective communication in the art and science of engineering and design, and it was founded in 1996 to recognize mentors within the FIRST robotics competition who lead, inspire, and empower. So congratulations and many thanks, because we know Mrs. Carlini puts in so many hours in her work with the robotics students and the robotics teams. So we are very grateful for the work that she does. Frost Middle School recently received the Support Music Merit Award. One of 78 schools in the nation awarded this distinction, and they named Livonia Public Schools among the best music communities in the U.S. So congratulations, and Mr. Michael Reyes was the one who shared this with us and is a big part of supporting those musical endeavors at Frost Middle School. We recently had the Youth Making a Difference. Speaking of our great LPTSA, I had a family wedding, so I was not able to be there, but Mr. Green was able to share some words of welcome and congratulations to all of our students. We had a great crowd that night, and all of the project displays were there in the cafeteria for people to see. And then, of course, the students were treated to a magic show. They always are excited to see the magician and really be celebrated for their opportunity to give back to their community. Just a few last notes to mark your calendars. We do still have one more Kappa performance. Kappa Vocal will present their jazz performance and their spring showcase on May 10th at 7 p.m. And so we will look forward to seeing you there. We then we've mentioned this a couple of times, but our LPS Education Foundation is having their very first golf outing, and they're getting a great response. So if you're interested, be sure to get your information in to Mrs. Ulasic. And then, if you can believe it, high school graduations are starting 1 month from today. 1 month. So Franklin is on Thursday this year. They are all USA Hockey Arena, Stevenson on Friday, and Churchill on Sunday at noon. So that time frame is a little bit different, but we are so excited for that, and we can hardly believe that that is literally 1 month away. So thank you so much, President Johnson, for letting us share some highlights and celebrate our wonderful students and staff from across the district.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Are there any comments? Seeing none, we will move on to item 3E, written communications. I do not have any written communications. Pardon me? Yes, we should. That's a good suggestion. We will take about a 5 to 10 minute recess, and we will be back. Thank you. Thank you, and we are now back, and we will continue with our agenda. As I said, on 3E, we did not have any written communication, so that'll take us to 3F, response to prior audience communication. I don't believe there is any this evening, which will take us to 3G, audience communication. This is the point of our meeting where we hear from community members. It's a time for the board to listen to concerns. It is not a time for question and answer or colloquy with the board. It should also be remembered that the board has 3 roles. Typically, we set the policy for the district, we hire and evaluate the superintendent, and we align the funding priorities to the district goals. So if anyone is speaking before the board tonight and you have a question or want a response to any issue that you have, if it comes within those 3 areas, then you can expect a response from the board. If it involves anything else, which we call our day-to-day operations, then you would get a response from our superintendent and most likely Mrs. Oquist. Also, our hearing is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We do have a timer. Mrs. Bradford will take care of that. Once you hit 3 minutes, you will hear a tone of some kind. That will be an indication to wrap it up. I do ask that when you hear that, you wrap it up as quickly as possible. And with that, I have 3 blue slips. The first one is from Brian Galdis. Mr. Galdis, good evening.
There's a button there.
There you go, you're green.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to meet with the board tonight. My name is Brian Galdis. I'm a former superintendent of South Redford Schools. I currently now work with GrowthWorks, and I'm the suicide prevention coordinator. And I'm here representing a coalition of school districts, which Livonia is one of them, Livonia Public Schools. The other districts are South Redford, Redford Union, Northville, Wayne Westland, Plymouth Canton, and Garden City. We also in the coalition is Trinity Health, former St. Mary's Hospital, as well as Corwell Health, which is the former Beaumont Hospital system. And we have one mission, and our mission is to battle adolescent depression and suicide and the stigma that revolves around that. And the statistics around suicide are not going in the right direction. And you may know some of these, but the CDC just put out some most recent study last December that stated since 2015, prior to COVID, the number of visits for students in crisis to hospital ERs has gone up by 8% every year since then, and revisits is up considerably. Suicide is now the 2nd leading cause of death for adolescents in the United States. It was the 3rd. It is now the 2nd. So, again, not going in the right direction. And approximately 9% of students across the United States, and Wayne County holds true to this statistic also, but 9% of our students, our high school students, have attempted a suicide. I think this is maybe the most stunning piece of information that I wrestle with every single day, even though I'm exposed to it. And so if Livonia, I believe, has about 4,500 high school students, somewhere in that neighborhood. If you extrapolated that percentage across Livonia, you would have in your schools around 400 students who have attempted a suicide. And if that really, that statistic there really brings it home to everybody in a community, kind of puts a face on those numbers. So our coalition and our mission is to work together to attack this, and to work together as 7 school districts and 2 hospitals. And we have accomplished some things in our work so far in the last 12 months. We've provided some very quality professional development for our social workers and the counselors within those 7 communities. And we've been doing that through St. Mary's, and we've been bringing them together. And we do some mini conferences there, but we also put on, in November each year, Wayne County has a professional development day for all school employees, or all school professional staff. And so we bring together all the counselors and the social workers that want to join. And again, many of the Livonia counselors have been there. And so we provide a full-day conference for them. We also put together some mini conferences, again, typically held at St. Mary's Hospital. And we focus on the work that they do. So we also provide them with networking. Because of the work that they do, and unfortunately, the small number of mental health professionals we have in our schools, they don't get to network with each other like they should be able to. And we are going in the right direction as far as schools in terms of numbers of mental health professionals in the schools, but we are doing that. And we are also providing mental health awareness for staff, and we have trained 4,500 adults in mental health, in suicide awareness in those 7 communities. And so that's more work that we've been doing. And the last thing is we have been advocating in Lansing for more resources. And most recently, we had Senator Kavanaugh toured the mental health space that you have in your high schools at Churchill High School, and was very impressed with what you're doing. She was also able to meet with the staff, and Jennifer Theriot was good enough to put together a nice presentation for her. I am going to leave you with this information. This kind of sums up the work that we do. If you have any questions at all, my phone number is on the back of it. Please feel free to call. Thank you for
Mr.
my time.
Galdes.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Yolanda Brown Spadell. Good evening. Just tap it. Just tap.
Be green.
There it goes.
Here we are. Good evening to you all. My name is Yolanda Brown Spidell. I am an LPS parent of 2 alumni, class of 2019 and class of 2022. I have a rising class of 2023 graduate, and I have a class of 2024 graduate. So I am a permanent part of the LPS community. I am also a certificated K-12 administrator, a certified trauma trainer, a PTSA parent. I'm a DEI consultant, a sociology professor at 6 higher ed institutions in Michigan and throughout this country, and I'm also a minister. So I rise to first say thank you, because I'm glad that I was here to see the board acknowledge Joshua Redding. His family they were my neighbors. I had an opportunity to minister to his grandmother at my church. And so I rise to ask the board to move beyond tears, thoughts, and prayers to action. I am aware that currently we have a DEI opening since the removal, since Lisa left to go on to greater and wonderful things. But I also want to acknowledge that I have had this conversation with our superintendent, and I want to thank her for her availability, her honesty, and her openness and her candor during this time. But I wanted to address the board with my concerns. My experience with some of the members of the LPS administration has been very disappointing, and I feel has been racialized, as I was labeled as intimidating, unable to collaborate in the work in my previous role with the LPS E&E committee. My boisterous and the urgency of my sharing narratives of how students are being harmed in LPS, specifically emotionally harmed, and I think it's just wonderful to hear the work that you are doing. I'm a former alternative ed teacher in Redford Union, as a matter of fact. That this concern is based on my concern and sometimes anxiety as a parent and as a Black parent around protecting the mental health, specifically of Black students in LPS. Given that we are all aware of how rampant suicidal ideations and completed suicides are in our country, and specifically in our district, hence Joshua. I've had my own experiences where my son, who is an alumni I know that LPS hears the concerns of their parents because my son was a student in ragtime, Mr. E2, that they were going to use the N-word against. And I was never called to ask. As a sociologist, I could have given a context. So I was really hurt that our school, Churchill, did not do that performance. I also want to share with the board that I have students who did not take an AP English class because the N-word was used in the classroom and without a context, again, so that my son did not want to be subjected to being in a space where that word was used without context. I hear the bell, so let me wrap this up. It is my hope that LPS administration and the board recognizes the necessity of having someone in this DEI position who understands the urgency of this work and has the emotional intelligence to do this work that makes people feel safe, seen, and supported, because I, in this work, did not feel safe, I did not feel seen, I did not feel supported as a Black parent in LPS. It is also my professional opinion, given the history of our city, Livonia being a sundown town, that we recognize that this work has a lot and that we have a lot of work to do in this area to not only come from ground zero, but for many of our spaces, we're actually in the basement. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third speaker is Colleen Bajero. Good evening. It's already on. There you go.
Okay, hi. Hi. Hello. I'm Colleen Badgerow. I'm an LPS graduate myself and mother of a second grader and soon-to-be kindergartner in the district. I'm a speech-language pathologist, but I've chosen to put my career on the back burner and devote myself to advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion for children within LPS. For the past 2 years, I've served as the DEI chairperson for the Coolidge PTA, while also serving to organize and support other DEI chairpeople from PTA units throughout the district. In addition, I volunteered to serve on the district-wide Engagement and Equity, or E&E, committee as part of the Parent Community Connections Subcommittee, originally under the leadership of Lisa Kaiser, who served as the DEI facilitator for the district from 2021 until this past November, at which time I stepped into a leadership role for the subcommittee at the request of district administrators who attempted to keep the committee intact and moving forward while we waited for the DEI facilitator vacancy to be filled. I just share this all with you to illuminate that I've been intricately involved in this work, and so that you understand my perspectives come informed by many hours of dedicated service on multiple levels. I believe wholeheartedly that actively engaging in diversity, equity, and inclusion education and initiatives is the path toward creating the culture shift our kids desperately need to survive and thrive in these divisive and challenging times. Like many of us, I'm deeply concerned when I see the data about the profound mental health crisis our kids are facing. Despite political and media agendas attempting to mislead people to distrust and misrepresent the goals of DEI work, I've witnessed and experienced the value DEI brings to the lives of children by helping them to recognize, understand, and respect individual differences, seek and provide supports to meet their unique needs, and develop a greater sense of belonging and safety in school and at home, and that is what DEI is about. I'm encouraged by the growth of DEI perspectives I've seen from PTAs throughout the district, from creating calming areas for kids with complex sensory needs, to ensuring there are allergy-friendly foods and drink options available, to supporting media specialists to fill the libraries with materials that represent a diverse range of stories and characters so that children can see themselves in others. I could offer a lot more examples, but I just hope that other families who see the value in growing this work will consider joining the DEI committee at their school's PTA. Shifting focus to the District Engagement and Equity Committee, I can share that it has suffered greatly from a lack of informed and empowered leadership, as evidenced by dwindling engagement and a lack of tangible progress since November, and if I'm honest, long before that. Looking forward and practicing the same growth mindset that LPS instills in its students, I'm confident that we can do much, much better as a district. I'm also confident that we need to make up for lost time and credibility in this committee by investing in and expanding the role of the DEI facilitator position in the upcoming school year. Given that the budgeted salary for the previously part-time position has not been paid throughout the school year, at least since November, I strongly encourage the board and the superintendent to reinvest those funds and make the position full-time, and to open it to candidates outside of the LPS staff to broaden the pool and find the most highly qualified person for the job. One last sentence. Finally, having someone equipped with these funds of knowledge at the decision-making table would add immense value and important perspective to the LPS cabinet, the whole team. Keeping in mind that you don't know what you don't know. Even as distinguished district leaders with years of experience in education, there are blind spots that can seriously impact children in the greater community that a DEI specialist could help to bring into focus for the benefit of all involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are all the blue slips that I have. Is there anyone else that wants to address the board this evening? Seeing none, then we will move on with our agenda. And that brings us to item 4, our consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any board member would like to have removed? Seeing none, may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the following consent agenda items as recommended by the superintendent. 5A, minutes of the regular meeting of March 20th, 2023. 5B, minutes of the special meeting of April 24th, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6, our business matters. Item A is purchase of LPS merchandise. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of Livonia Public Schools merchandise from MBS Incorporated, South Lyon, Michigan, for an amount not to exceed $100,000.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton. And Mrs. Smith.
Thank
Good
you,
evening.
President Johnson. I'm happy to bring this recommendation to the board, and I appreciate the board's time to discuss this purchase, both at the study session and the committee meeting. We've had the ability to partner with MBS for the last couple years for an LPS merchandise purchase. This company really is a full-service company that takes care of this purchase for us. They put on a website for us that we then send the link out to our staff. They can go on and pick a name brand piece of apparel that then gets personalized with our LPS logo. The company then takes care of, answering any questions from the staff and taking care of any maybe issues that arise during the ordering. They then embroider it and deliver it to 27 locations across the district. So they've been a wonderful company to partner with, and I'm happy to bring this recommendation to you tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Any questions from the board? Mrs. Burton.
Just a comment. I think this is a fabulous opportunity of something to do that's meaningful for our staff. It's important to recognize our staff, but if we can do this in a way that is meaningful, it is a lovely gift for each staff member. They get to choose which item they want that would suit them well, but it's also a great, it's a terrific morale boost, I think, in our buildings, not only for our staff, but for other folks who are visiting, to see that much LPS wear go in our buildings. Sometimes I know whole staffs choose to wear it on the same day. Inevitably, there are folks in buildings on any given day with that, and it just lends another air of professionalism to our teaching staff and our folks in our buildings. So I think it's a fabulous win-win all the way around, and I'd like to thank those who came up with the idea, and I'm glad that we continue to do it for the last few years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? I likewise have been out in the community, and staff is very appreciative. It's nothing but thank yous for the recognition and I think they really enjoy it, so we appreciate it as well. Thank you. All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton, to approve the purchase of LPS merchandise. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson,
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6B, ratify the sale of second series 2021 bonds. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bonnefield.
sorry. Okay. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the attached resolution to ratify the sale of the second series of the 2021 voter-approved bonds.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Frank. And again, Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, President Johnson, and again, thank you to the board for the opportunity to discuss the second sale of bonds, both at our study session and the committee of the whole meeting. This would be a resolution to ratify the sale that's set to take place this Thursday. This would be for $70 million, and it's part of our overall bond that was approved by the voters in 2021. And again, I'd like to take a minute to thank our community that supported our bonds. We got to hear about some of the work just this evening that we're able to do with these dollars that have been entrusted to us. Some of the main highlights from our bond are the updating of our library and media centers. We're also doing renovations of our kitchens that are original to our buildings. Another major one is the air conditioning that's going into all of our classrooms. We were able to do half of the locations last summer, and the other half are taking place this summer, so we're very excited for that. And of course, our new early childhood center that's set to be open next fall, as well as the new addition of the robotics that's set to be open this fall over at the LCTC location. So again, a huge thank you to our community for allowing us to use these funds to enhance our facilities and continue to make them places that we can be proud to belong to and send our kids to.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Questions or comments? Mrs. Burton?
Yes. Mrs. Smith, can you share with the folks this evening, we discussed at the study session in the committee of the whole, the upgraded rating and the therefore savings to our taxpayers?
I would be happy to. So before we sell bonds, we work with our financial advisors to partner with a ratings agency. We work with Standard & Poor. And this past rating agency call, we spent, over an hour with them, kind of highlighting different things happening in our district, going over our financial statements and our financial practices. And I am very happy to report, as the board knows, that we've been upgraded in our bond rating. So we are now at an A+ with a stable outlook, which is huge, and it's significant to have gotten this rating increase. The rating agencies, is looking at the growth of our fund balance that shows the stability. They're also tout that the district is, making wise financial decisions and, and feel that we are a very stable investment. Our financial advisors estimate that this has saved us about 0.1%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when it's a $186 million bond, this is going to save us $900,000 in interest costs, which goes right back to our taxpayer. That's less that we have to collect from the taxpayers to borrow these dollars to make these building improvements. So we're very excited for that news and to share that with our community.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Any others? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Frank, to ratify the sale of second series bonds. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 6C, Early Childhood Center Roofing Rebid. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Frank.
I move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation of the owner's representative, Plant Moran Cressa, to award the contract for roofing at the Early Childhood Center to A-Win Roofing, LLC, Milan, Michigan, for a total approved project amount of $1,667,819, and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bonifield, and we'll hear from Mr. Francis. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. President. We'll just do that so I don't make a mistake out of it. We've spoke with the board on this on multiple occasions. The most recent was last week at the Committee of the Whole, and this was a rebid on the roofing, the new roofing project at the robotics addition that's occurring, as Mrs. Smith just mentioned, at the LCTC property. This was just something that at the time of the full bid, we did not have any bidders, and it was not due to lack of interest. It just was some timing concerns, et cetera. So I'm sorry, I said LCTC,
Yes.
didn't I? This is
Yeah.
early childhood, apologies. As soon as I saw somebody shaking their hand, I'm like, I felt like I already knew. At the Early Childhood Center, my apologies. So we did have good coverage. This is a part of the new build of the Early Childhood Center at the current former Dickinson Junior High location on Newburgh Road. The $1,667,819 is both for hard construction, contingency, and fees are all included into that. I do want to make note that this is something that is, the Early Childhood Center is a 2021 bond initiative, as Mrs. Smith just mentioned. However, for this specific item to this specific contractor to construct the new roof on that building, rather than using bond funds directly for the payment, we are going to use the Capital Projects Fund. And what we're doing here is twofold. One, we know that throughout this bond thus far, the market has dictated some higher costs here and there. The Early Childhood Center itself has gone a little beyond the original budget that we had laid out before all of the work had started. And so as a bond team and as a district, we are looking for ways to, of course, try to supplement some items to make sure that we carry through the dollars that we'll have through the bond throughout all phases. So to that end, Mrs. Smith, our Chief Financial Officer, and I had a conversation, and she had recommended we use the capital projects. And to back that the story up just a little bit, we do have funds that came from the Child Care Stabilization Grant from the state of Michigan, both in fiscal year 22 and the current fiscal year of 23. And we received $900,000 each year from the state for that. It must be spent directly on and only for early childhood. And so therefore it makes quite a bit of sense to supplement this project of building the Early Childhood Center with these dollars. So Mrs. Smith will transfer that money from the grant into the district's Capital Projects Fund, also known as the Q Fund, and we will use those dollars to pay specifically this vendor for this part of the project, because it is a very simple way to say these dollars are going directly to early childhood education.
Thank you, Mr. Francis, for that explanation. Questions or comments from the board?
Other than getting the location wrong, I was pretty good on that one.
That wasn't bad.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bonifield, to approve the contract for the Early Childhood Center roofing rebid. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6D, asbestos abatement at Frost 2021 bond. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the recommendation of ARC Environmental Group Incorporated to award the contract for asbestos abatement at Frost Middle School to Environmental Maintenance Engineers Incorporated, Inkster, Michigan, for a total approved project amount of $51,200 and authorize the superintendent or her designee to negotiate and execute final contracts.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And once again, Mr. Francis.
Thank you, President Johnson. This is a 2021 bond renovation project. It will be funded through the 2021 bond. This abatement project will be occurring specifically at Frost Middle School, and even more specifically in portions of their library media center and their kitchen. Those are two areas that we're taking over early in the building to begin work. They'll be isolated away from staff and students. And the work in those areas, we've done through the 2013 bond, the vast majority of abatement throughout the district when we did those renovations. But as we know, we did not do in the 13 bond, neither the kitchens nor the LMC. So we do have some work at Frost for this. And the $51,200 is both for the work itself as well as contingency.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the asbestos abatement at Frost 2021 bond. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. That takes us to item 6E, RICO Copier Contract Amendment 2021 bond. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of 22 RICO copy machines from RICO USA Incorporated, Exton, Pennsylvania, in the amount not to exceed $263,764.20.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield. And once again, Mr. Francis.
Thank you, sir. Just to start off, a quick clarification. We did have a title change on this agenda item. It is not a contract. It shouldn't matter because what you read as the resolution was exactly the same. It's just simply not going to be a contract extension. It is a separate purchase. So just to clarify that for folks. And this is out of the 2021 bond. We did have plans and a budget in the IT budget portion of the bond for the multi-function printers and copiers to be replaced. We're going to do that in stages, and this is the first stage. So this bond purchase and the pricing coming through the My Deal contract, which satisfies the board's requirement to bid, will be done with new purchase of 22 machines. So our highest used machines with more than 2 million copies / prints on them will be replaced with the 22 MF CPs in this purchase. And then as a side note, as discussed in more detail at the committee of the whole, we will then in some areas and locations swap out more lighter used for the medium used areas in a building to try to extend the life of those machines as well. So these specific dollars will be going towards 22 new machines.
Thank you, Mr. Francis.
You're
Questions or comments? Mrs. Acosta.
On behalf of all staff frustrated with jammed copiers, we thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Francis, thank you. We had a greater discussion on this at the committee of the whole, and it was a more complex issue than you've made it sound relatively simple tonight. But at the committee of the whole meeting, there was some in-depth discussion, and it was a little, as I say, a little more complex. So thank you for that discussion and the explanation. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Bonnefield, to accept the purchase of RICO copiers. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6F, purchase of Chromebooks. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Bradford.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of up to 1,500 Chromebooks from Presidio Networked Solutions Group, LLC, Ferndale, Michigan, in an amount not to exceed $502,950.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton. And once again, Mr. Francis.
Thank you, President Johnson. This purchase from Presidio, which is a company that I'm sure the board, the name is familiar because we do purchase different IT devices from them, is the pricing comes from the REMC Purchasing Consortium, which again satisfies the board's requirement to bid. These up to 1,500 Chromebooks will be going towards replacing the 2017-2018 Chromebooks that were purchased that will no longer be supported by Google. We had much deeper discussion in the committee of the whole of where other machines will be coming from, but as far as this specific purchase, we have a not to exceed amount, and that would get us up to 1,500 to top off to replace 5,500 as a total.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments? Mrs. Bonifield.
I just want to say this project and then the copier project as well, there was a lot of really creative thinking that went into stretching every dollar that we can out of our equipment while still maintaining the functionality and the appropriate level of software and engine, so that we make sure that everybody's got what they need and it's at the appropriate time in its life, but that we've been able to extend some of this on these two projects, and really very creative thinking and really thinking outside of the box to make sure that everybody gets what they need, but we can extend the life on some of those things that we might be able to get a little more use out of.
Thank you. I'll pass that along because there were many, many minds and many other people on the teams that were coming up with these ideas and really tweaking them and getting it finalized for what the board has seen in the past couple of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Burton, to approve the purchase of Chromebooks. Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford.
Yes.
Mrs. Burton.
Yes.
Mrs. Frank.
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6G, boiler projects at Cass, Kennedy, and Nichi-Iro. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve Engineered Comfort Systems, Taylor, Michigan, and Systemp Corporation, Rochester Hills, Michigan, for summer 2023 boiler projects at Cass Elementary, Nichi-Iro Elementary, and Kennedy Elementary Schools for a total project amount of $524,625.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford. And once again, Mrs. Burton.
Yes, as I stated in the committee of the whole, I'm going to be abstaining from the vote on this item because my family's company bid to a company that appears in these documents.
I forgot about that. Thank you for reminding me.
You're very welcome.
Now, Mr. Francis.
Thank you again. This is a planned project. We've been doing our boilers for several years now, and this is actually the final phase of that project via our sinking fund as the budgetary source and our 10-year facilities plan. So we do have 2 locations here with regard to new boilers, and that would be Nichi-Iro and Cass Elementary. Cass, of course, is no longer running traditional elementary programs, but we do have LPS programming in it, along with a portion of it which is rented to childcare through a leasing program. So those dollars, the $524,625, is in total both for the Cass project and the Nichi-Iro project, and also at Kennedy, and explained in more detail, but I'll just say briefly that we did have failure of a boiler there, and the manufacturers are completely replacing those. Even though the warranty did not require it, they are replacing those units, and the amount here that Systemp will be doing is labor only. So at those 3 buildings, we will have boiler projects, and the amount that we are requesting the board to approve is for materials, labor, and contingency.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to approve the purchase of, or the boiler projects at Cass, Kennedy, and Nietzsche Eero. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
I will. Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes, and President Johnson?
Yes.
Okay.
The motion carries. Thank you. That takes us to item 6H, purchase of microphones for Franklin PAC. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bonnefield.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve the purchase of a wireless microphone system for the Franklin High School Performing Arts Center from B&H Photo, New York, New York, in an amount of $41,858.98.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Acosta. And once again, Mr. Francis.
Thank you. Yes, I am. So this is a purchase to fully replace the microphone system, the stage microphone system at the Franklin High School Performing Arts Center. That system was failing for two reasons. Part of it was due to a burst pipe that broke down some of the systems. But as luck would have it, they borrowed some of the microphones from the Churchill PAC, and the issue of intermittent interferences at the Franklin PAC with their system was solved with the brand that Churchill and the system that Churchill had. So we are replacing the system at Franklin with what the board has seen in our quotes. The new system will be fully replacing what is currently at Franklin's PAC. It has a 2-year manufacturer's warranty, and it is a system that the PAC manager at Franklin has tested out and proved the concept that they do work at Franklin, and it is his recommendation and therefore my recommendation to the board to purchase that system for the Performing Arts Center at Franklin High School.
Thank you, Mr. Francis. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonnefield, supported by Mrs. Acosta, to approve the purchase of microphones for Franklin PAC. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you for your work on that, Mr. Francis. I know that's been a long-standing problem, so. All right, that takes us to item 7, our instruction matters, and item A, recommend expulsion of 2 secondary students. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Burton.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District expel 2 secondary students for violations of the Livonia Public Schools Board of Education policies.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford? I'm sorry, Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
My apologies. Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us to item 8, personnel matters, and item 8A is teachers for approval. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and offer employment for the 2022-23 school year to the teacher listed on the attached document.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Acosta for teachers for approval, and I think we're going to hear from Mr. Abate.
That is correct. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Just one staff member to present to you this evening. This person has been selected to fill a need in occupational therapy. She's very well qualified to fill this position and has been fully vetted through our interview process. We're confident she will perform at a high level and represent Livonia Public Schools in a manner that is consistent with our shared vision and collective commitments. The position has also been included in our 2022-2023 budget. Pleased to be recommending this talented professional to join our LPS family, and with your approval, we're excited to have her working with our students.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Are there any questions or comments?
Welcome.
Welcome aboard. Thank you. We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Acosta, to approve our teachers for approval. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us now to item, let me get it here. Item 8B, leaves of absence. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson,
Mrs. Acosta.
move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the superintendent and approve the request for a leave of absence as listed below. Chelsea English, effective 2023-24 school year. Emily Newton, effective 2023-24 school year. And Laura Stevens, effective 2023-24 school year.
Support.
We have that was Mrs. Frank.
Miss-
We have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank. And once again, Mr. Abate.
Yes, as you noted, the staff members listed in your documentation are requesting leaves in accordance with their collective bargaining agreement, and we ask that you please approve the leaves as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Abate. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Acosta, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve the leave of absence. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 8C, resignations. This does not require a motion, as for board information, which now takes us to item 8D, retirements. And may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Frank.
Thank you, ma'am. Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District adopt the attached resolution of appreciation for services rendered by Tracy Altman, Julie Clark, Reed Fredericks, Angela Jenkins, Kimberly Cozen, Darcy Litka, Gerald Lucas, Valerie Maldu, Daniel McDonald, Dunn, thank you. Colleen Knott, Lori Johnson, Kim Quint, Erica Reeby, Pamela Regulski, Kimberly Ross, Elizabeth Satori, Michelle Schnerstein, Alan Schnover, Susan Stromberg, Emily Tartiglia, Stephen Taylor, Carol Wheeler, Claudia Zimmer, and Patricia Zakowski.
Support?
We have a motion, that was a mouthful. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Burton, to approve the resolutions for those retiring. And we're going to hear from Mrs. Keats.
Yes, you are. Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight we honor and congratulate 24 members of our LPS family who are retiring from their positions with Livonia Public Schools at the conclusion of this school year. As these staff members leave the district, they take with them a combined total of 568 years of experience. On behalf of the administration, I would like to thank our retirees for the dedicated years of service they have provided to the students of LPS. And we ask the board to please adopt the attached resolution of appreciation.
Thank you, Mrs. Keats. Are there questions or comments from the board? Mrs. I saw Mrs. Bradford first.
Of course. Oh, I just want to say thank you to all of the retirees. As I was looking through the resolutions, most of them had about 25 years plus of service to our district, and I just thought that was so impressive, and it really told a story of how they led by example through the district and served so many years, and that's really impressive. So there's a few on that list that I want to say no to. I always say that every time, but I know we're going to have to let them go. But I just really am thankful for all their years of service. So thanks to all those retiring, and best wishes.
Mrs. Frank.
I also want to thank all of these teachers. There is just so many years of experience and so many lives that have been touched through these individuals. And so This year, Carson has Ms. Schnorstein, and he has, in math, you've taught those AP kids at Churchill and the MSC kids, and you've done a fantastic job for all these years. So thank you for your years of service. Thank you for your dedication to our kids and our students and to the Churchill community. And when you have a list like this, there's just so many with such wonderful history and rich expertise that they have in their area, and I just cannot let this day go also without acknowledging Mrs. Stromberg. I just want to say personally, she was one of the first people I met in this district when I came in, and one of the first teachers that I observed in the district weekly in her classroom, and she is a magician with students. And to see her art and watch it on a week-by-week basis, take these little kindergartners and turn them into, at the end of the school year, independent little learners, it is amazing to see. And this district will be, she will be greatly missed in the district. And I just wanted to say thank you to Mrs. Stromberg for her leadership in the district, for all that she does to all the kindergarten teachers in our district, and how much she has meant to our family personally and each one of my kids that had her, and to our district, and to Mr. Stromberg, who is still with us at Stevenson, and to her daughter, who is teaching in the district. So hopefully that legacy will continue. But I just wanted to say thank you personally to her.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Burton.
Yes, piggybacking along what my colleagues have already said, there are so many folks on this list that we know personally, beyond professionally, but not exclusively, but there are teachers, there are paraprofessionals, there are secretaries, there are administrators, exactly, and other roles that these folks serve. We are so grateful to our classroom teachers, but also to the entire team of our staff. About half are classroom teachers, and then the other half are all the folks who wrap around that 8:30 to 3 o'clock room where our kids spend so much of their time. But again, such a wealth of knowledge, and a wealth, when I look down this list at the folks that I know personally, such a wealth of care for the well-being of our littlest learners all the way up through our 26-year-olds. And it's always bittersweet to vote on retirements. We have said every time, if we vote no, will you stay? But it doesn't work that way. We do wish you a wonderful, wonderful, rich retirement. And we thank you so very much for your years of service, for those who are here with us this evening, and for the many who on this list who are not, but who hold a very special place in our hearts.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mrs. Oquist.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Because we are thrilled to have one of our staff members and part of our LPS family here tonight, I'd like to invite Mrs. Michelle Schnorstein to stand up and be recognized, because you are one of the very deserving retirees that we are honoring this evening. I just love that you are here this evening, and so grateful for your service and that of so many of your colleagues that we're recognizing tonight. And as all of my board team colleagues have mentioned, these are folks who represent each and every corner of our school district. And I too have looked through this list and thought we just are losing so much expertise, so much heart, so much dedication.
Yes.
And I think we are starting to see just a shift in the societal workplace about how long folks stay in any one given profession, or certainly with one employer.
Yes.
And the longevity, and again, whether you've been part of our staff family for a year or 40 years, you mean the world to us. But I just want to recognize the longevity that exists within this group, and what comes with that is not only a tremendous amount of experience, but a commitment to this community, a commitment to the children that we serve together, to their colleagues. And I don't know that 5, 10, 15 years from now we'll continue to see this level of longevity. So I just want to recognize it while it's here, and just congratulate each and every one of these people. It's a tough decision to get to this point. And so I know for those that are, we certainly want to celebrate and recognize you. But thank you for being here with us tonight, Michelle.
Thank you, Mrs. Oquist. Any other questions or comments? All right. We have a motion by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mrs. Burton, to approve the resolutions for employees who are retiring. And Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries, and again, thank you and congratulations to all the retirees. That now takes us to item 9, hearing from board members. And 9A is the first reading of board policy IDF, interscholastic athletics.
We're changing name takes here.
And playing musical chairs, are we?
We are.
I will turn it over at this point to Mr. E2.
Thank you very much, President Johnson. This is for IDF and IDFA. We are looking to remove IDFA and looking to do a first read for IDF, Instructional Program Interscholastic Activities. I do want to make one note that we do need to add the words "and athletics" to the title. We left that off accidentally, but we'll be sure to have that on for our second reading. It is referenced a couple times in the first paragraph, but I will go ahead and do the first reading for IDF, Instructional Program, Interscholastic Activities, and Athletics. The Board of Education recognizes the need for extracurricular and interscholastic activities and athletics and encourages student participation. The board further recognizes that participating in these activities and athletics carries with it the responsibility of good behavior in and out of school and being in good academic standing. Failure on the part of any student to meet this responsibility is cause for suspension or removal from participation. A program of interscholastic athletics shall be encouraged as an integral part of the total program of physical education. The interscholastic athletics program is designed for those students who have a particular interest, ability, and the desire to invest the time and energy required to participate in a Livonia Public Schools athletic program. The board shall review and approve by resolution the school district's participation and membership in the Michigan High School Athletic Association, MHSAA. In conjunction with this review, the board delegates to the superintendent or designee the responsibility for adherence to MHSAA's constitution and bylaws, as well as the supervision of MHSAA-related activities in accordance with the code of conduct in the school's student handbook. All interscholastic athletic activities shall be conducted in accordance with law.
Thank you, Mr. Ito. I know you spent a lot of time on this particular policy, and there was a lot of discussion both in our study session and the committee as a whole. So thank you for all the work that you put in on this.
Thank you.
Now that we've heard that, are there any comments, changes to this particular policy, Mrs. Burton?
Just a quick comment. Those of us who have all this in front of us can see it, but for those who are listening from home, we are eliminating the other policy because we're incorporating it into this one.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Burton. Other questions or comments? So we're all good that we can put this on for our next regular meeting in June, or actually the end of May.
May 22nd.
Right, it's May, for a second reading. Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Ito, again. That now takes us to item 9B, first reading of board policy IFD, library media centers and classroom libraries. And I think we're hearing from Mrs. O'Brien. Good evening.
Good evening. I am bringing forth a change to board policy IFD. We are adding some language about classroom libraries following the same procedure as our media centers do when it comes to book selection. So with your permission, I will read this policy. So the title has been changed: Instructional Program, Library Media Centers, and Classroom Libraries. The Livonia Public Schools School District establishes library media centers to provide and promote the intellectual, cultural, social, and ethical development of students, and to provide resources which extend and deepen the experiences encompassed in the curriculum. Library Media Center materials are determined through a process based on the American Libraries Association, ALA, guidance for selection of books and other materials of learning, which contribute to the growth of individual students.
Selection for classroom libraries follows the same guidance criteria.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Brien. And once again, I know we had some significant discussion on this policy. And for those who may not be really familiar, this is one of the things that the board does. It's one of our main roles. So we work in conjunction with our cabinet, and a lot of hours go into these, so we appreciate that. So now that we've heard the policy, are there any questions, additions, deletions? Are we good with this? Okay, so we will put this on for a second reading as well at our next regular meeting, May 22nd. All right, thank you. Then that takes us now to item 9. Let's see, we are at 9C, which is second reading of the board policy, board bylaw, BHA Code of Ethics. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Bradford.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Bylaw BHA Code of Ethics.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonifield. And once again, this is the second reading. This came up for a first reading at our last meeting. Everybody is satisfied with this language as well? All right, so we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonifield, to adopt and accept the recommendation on board policy BHA Code of Ethics. And another thing I'd say is this particular one is very important to the board because this is the one that guides our conduct. And it's important that the community be able to see this as well. And what we generally do, and I expect we will do it this time as well, if this is approved, do we have a copy to sign tonight by any chance?
No,
okay.
It has to be enlarged.
It has to be enlarged.
I
Okay.
wanted to make sure it was approved first before we did.
We did that? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Wozniak. But what we will do is we will all sign that Code of Ethics, and we have a copy of our old one against the wall in the back. The new one will replace that, and we will move forward. So thank you again for all our work on this. We went through this item by item at one of our study sessions, and we always do that. We always review because things are always changing and evolving, and it's good to do once a year. We sort of got away from that during COVID, but now that we're fully in person, this is one of the things that we will continue to do on an annual basis. So we have a motion by Mrs. Bradford, supported by Mrs. Bonifield, to adopt our Code of Ethics. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bradford?
Yes.
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. Mrs. Burton?
Yes.
Mrs. Frank?
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
President Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us now to item 9D, second reading of board policy IHFB, high school graduation ceremonies. May I have a motion, please?
President Johnson?
Mrs. Bonifield.
Sorry. Okay, move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District accept the recommendation of the Policy Committee and adopt board policy language per the attached document for Board Policy IHFB, high school graduation ceremonies.
Support.
We have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Bradford. Once again, this is a policy that was brought before the board for first reading at our last regular meeting. Again, a lot of work went into this policy as well. And if are there any comments, questions on this policy? Seeing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Bonifield, supported by Mrs. Bradford, to accept this policy. And Mrs. Bonifield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Bonifield says yes. Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. President Johnson.
Yes. You can call me whatever you need.
It's quite the night.
Yes.
Good to go.
All right, that motion carries. Thank you. That takes us now to item 9E, approval for board members to take MASB classes. And may I have a motion, please?
President Johnson.
Mrs. Burton.
Move that the Board of Education of the Livonia Public Schools School District approve that Board Trustees Madeline Acosta, Colleen Burton, Crystal Frank, and Mark Johnson take MASB classes for a total cost of approximately $594.
We have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank. And as I indicated earlier, when Mrs. Jenkins was presenting us with these awards, this is just an example of the ongoing work that we do. I don't think there's been a presentation of MASB classes that one of us, probably multiple of us, have taken. And I really appreciate it because I think it makes this board a top board in the state of Michigan. And I think everybody recognizes that, and we certainly appreciate it. So we have a motion by Mrs. Burton, supported by Mrs. Frank, to approve board members to take MASB classes. Mrs. Bonnefield, would you take the roll, please?
Mrs. Burton,
Yes.
Mrs. Frank,
Yes.
Mrs. Bradford,
Yes.
Mrs. Acosta.
Yes.
Mrs. Bonnefield says yes. President Johnson.
Yes, that motion carries. That takes us now to item 9G, hearing from board members. And as has become customary, I will open it up to the board for comments at this time. Mrs. Frank.
Thank you, President Johnson. I just wanted to say, as we head into May, there's just so much going on in our schools, and I want to appreciate all of the teachers, all of the PTSAs that are doing all this work to make May so special for our kids. There's so many concerts, there's so many celebrations, there's honors nights, and just so many things that we saw earlier that has happened in April, and it is just going to be ramped up in May. And so as we enter into Staff Appreciation Month, I just wanted to say thank you to our staff and also to all the PTSAs that worked so hard and diligently to honor them and celebrate them. We have so many great volunteers in the district, and so I just wanted to say congratulations to them and thank you for all that you do. And even heading into this big month that we're doing lots of celebrations, it takes lots of people to make celebrations effective and fun for all the kids and students. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Other questions or comments? As always, I want to take the time to thank, again, our cabinet, our staff, our administrators, and all employees in the district for everything they do, not only for the students, but for the committee at large. It's just amazing what they do on a daily basis, and we thank you. If there's nothing else, we are now at the end of our agenda, and we will adjourn, and thank you.